The phone call came at midnight. Elvis wanted to meet Dean Martin privately to discuss something that could change music history. When two of America's biggest stars finally came face to face, away from the spotlight, they discovered something that would influence their art for the rest of their lives. It was October 15th, 1969, and Dean Martin was winding down after his second show at the Sands Hotel when his private phone rang. At 52, Dean had seen it all in the entertainment business, so very few things surprised him anymore. But the voice on the other end of the line that night caught him completely off guard. "Mr. Martin, this is Elvis Presley. I know it's late, but I was wondering if we could meet. Tonight, if possible, just the two of us." Dean paused, thinking this might be some kind of elaborate prank. Elvis Presley calling him directly? They'd never even been formally introduced, despite both being massive stars who often performed in the same city. "Dean," said Dean carefully, "is this really you?" "Yes, sir, it is. I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time, and I'm only in Vegas for one more night. Would you be willing to meet me somewhere private, away from all the chaos?" There was something in Elvis's voice that Dean had never heard before in interviews or recordings. Vulnerability, almost desperation. This wasn't the confident king of rock and roll calling. This was a man who needed something. "Sure, kid," replied Dean, using the paternal tone that came naturally to him with younger performers. "Where do you want to meet?" "Do you know Mel's Diner on Boulder Highway? It's about 20 minutes out of town. They stay open all night, and nobody from the Strip ever goes there." Dean knew the place, a simple 24-hour diner that served truck drivers and insomniacs, the kind of establishment where two of the world's biggest stars could sit without being recognized or bothered. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, Dean said. "Mr. Martin?" "Dean, thank you. This means more to me than you know." Dean hung up the phone with a mixture of curiosity and concern. What could Elvis Presley possibly want to discuss that required such secrecy, and why did he sound so troubled? 25 minutes later, Dean pulled his black Cadillac into the parking lot of Mel's Diner. The place looked exactly as he'd expected. Neon sign flickering, a few long-haul trucks parked outside, and the kind of anonymous atmosphere that made it perfect for a clandestine meeting. Inside, Dean immediately spotted Elvis sitting in a corner booth, wearing dark sunglasses despite the late hour, and a simple black leather jacket that made him look more like a regular customer than the king of rock and roll. He had arrived first and chosen the most secluded spot in the diner. As Dean approached the table, Elvis stood up and extended his hand. "Dean Martin," he said, with genuine awe in his voice, "thank you for coming." "Elvis Presley," Dean replied with a warm smile. "It's about time we met." They sat down across from each other, and Dean was immediately struck by how different Elvis seemed from his public persona. Gone was the swaggering confidence, the hip-shaking bravado, and the larger-than-life presence. Instead, Dean saw a young man who looked tired, troubled, and somehow smaller than he appeared on stage. "You want some coffee?" Dean asked, signaling to the waitress. "That'd be great," Elvis replied, removing his sunglasses and revealing eyes that looked older than his 34 years. After the waitress brought their coffee and disappeared back behind the counter, Elvis leaned forward and got straight to the point. "Dean, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. How do you do it? How do you stay yourself in this business?" The question caught Dean off guard. "What do you mean, kid?" Elvis ran his hair through his famous hair, a gesture that revealed just how nervous he was. "I mean, how do you perform night after night, year after year, and still feel like you're being authentic? How do you connect with the music, with the audience, without losing who you really are?" Dean studied the younger man's face, beginning to understand why this meeting was so important to Elvis. "You're going through something, aren't you?" Elvis nodded, and for a moment he looked like he might start crying. Dean, I haven't felt like myself on stage in years. I get up there and I go through the motions, and the crowd goes wild, but I feel empty, like I'm playing a character instead of being Elvis Presley. When did it start? Dean asked gently. I think it was after the Army, after the movies started, Elvis said. Colonel Parker keeps booking me into these films that I hate, these songs that don't mean anything to me. And when I do get to perform live, it's always the same songs, the same moves, the same everything. I feel like I'm trapped in a prison made of my own success. Dean sipped his coffee, recognizing the pain in Elvis's voice because he'd felt it himself during some of the darker periods of his career. You know, Dean said slowly, I went through something similar after I split with Jerry Lewis. For a while there, I didn't know who I was supposed to be on stage. Was I a singer, a comedian, an actor? I was so worried about disappointing people that I almost stopped being myself entirely. What did you do? Elvis asked eagerly. I had to remember why I started performing in the first place. Not for the money, not for the fame, but because music made me feel something real. So I started choosing songs that meant something to me personally, even if they weren't what people expected. Elvis leaned back in the booth, absorbing this advice. But what if the people around you, managers, record labels, movie studios, what if they don't want you to change? What if they want you to keep being the same thing forever? Dean's expression grew serious. Elvis, let me tell you something I learned the hard way. The people who truly love your art will follow you wherever your creativity takes you. The ones who just want you to repeat the same thing over and over again, they're not really fans of your music. They're fans of their own nostalgia.
But what about the business side? Elvis asked. The contracts, the obligations, the money. The business will adapt if you're strong enough to insist on authenticity, Dean replied. Look at Sinatra. You think Frank's managers wanted him to record all those melancholy albums in the 50s? But he insisted on singing songs that reflected where he was emotionally, and it resulted in some of the greatest music ever made. Elvis nodded thoughtfully. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. About Frank, about you, about all the artists I respect. You all seem to have this freedom that I don't have. Freedom isn't given, kid, Dean said with a slight smile. It's taken, but you have to be willing to fight for it. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, both men lost in thought. Finally, Elvis spoke again. There's something else, he said quietly. I've been thinking about changing my sound completely, going back to my roots, but also exploring new territory. Gospel, blues, country, even some of the folk music that's popular now. But everyone tells me it's career suicide. Dean's eyes lit up with genuine excitement. Now you're talking. That's exactly what you should be doing. Take risks, challenge yourself, surprise people. You really think so? Elvis asked, hope creeping into his voice for the first time that evening. Elvis, you're one of the most talented performers I've ever seen, Dean said earnestly. But talent without artistic growth is just a circus act. You owe it to yourself and to your real fans to keep evolving. Elvis smiled for the first time since Dean had arrived. You know, I've been writing some songs lately. Personal stuff, not the kind of thing they usually let me record. Tell me about them, Dean encouraged. For the next hour, Elvis opened up about his creative frustrations, his artistic ambitions, and his fears about taking control of his own career. Dean listened with the wisdom of someone who had faced similar struggles and found his way through them.
The thing is, Elvis said as they prepared to leave, I respect you so much because you never seem to compromise your dignity. Even when you're being funny or casual, there's always this underlying class to everything you do. Dean was genuinely touched by the compliment. Elvis, you have that same quality. I've watched you perform, and even when you're doing the most commercial material, there's something authentic about your delivery. Don't lose that. As they stood up to leave, Elvis extended his hand again, but this time it was with the confidence of someone who had found a new direction. "Dean, this conversation has meant more to me than you know. I came here tonight feeling lost, and I'm leaving with a clear vision of what I need to do." "What's that?" Dean asked. "I'm going to start making music that means something to me again," Elvis said firmly, "even if it scares the people around me, even if it's not what everyone expects." Dean smiled and patted the younger man on the shoulder. "That's the spirit, kid, and if you ever need someone to talk to about the business or about staying true to yourself, you call me any time." They walked out of the diner together, two superstars who had found an unexpected kinship in their shared struggles with artistic authenticity. The impact of that midnight conversation became clear in the months that followed. Elvis began asserting more control over his music, insisting on recording songs that reflected his personal growth and artistic vision. While some of his commercial handlers resisted, Elvis's renewed passion for his art resulted in some of the most powerful performances of his career. Dean, meanwhile, was inspired by Elvis's hunger for artistic growth. Their conversation reminded him of his own journey toward authenticity, and it reinforced his commitment to choosing projects that challenged him rather than simply repeating past successes. But perhaps the most significant outcome of their meeting was the friendship that developed between them. Despite their different backgrounds and musical styles, Dean and Elvis discovered that they shared similar values about art, authenticity, and the responsibility that comes with influence.
They began calling each other regularly, sharing advice about everything from dealing with difficult managers to staying grounded in an industry that constantly pulled them away from their true selves. Years later, when people asked Dean about his friendship with Elvis, he would always emphasize how intelligent and thoughtful the younger performer was. People saw the flashy clothes and the hip movements and thought Elvis was just a natural performer who didn't think too deeply about his art, Dean would say. But that couldn't have been further from the truth. He was one of the most thoughtful artists I ever met. Elvis, for his part, credited Dean with helping him rediscover his artistic courage. In several interviews, he mentioned how much he respected Dean's ability to maintain his dignity while still being entertaining and accessible. The secret meeting at Mel's Diner remained just that, a secret, for many years. Neither man ever spoke about it publicly, understanding that some conversations are too personal and too important to turn into publicity. But the effects of their midnight talk rippled through both of their careers. Elvis's later work showed more artistic daring and personal investment, while Dean continued to choose projects that challenged him artistically, rather than simply capitalizing on his established image. Their friendship also influenced how they viewed their roles as entertainers. Both men began to see themselves not just as performers, but as artists with a responsibility to push boundaries and inspire others to take creative risks. When Elvis died in 1977, Dean was one of the first people to call the Presley family to offer his condolences. He spoke at length with Elvis's father about the young man's artistic integrity and his commitment to growth as a performer. The phone call that came at midnight in 1969 had indeed changed music history, not through any grand public gesture, but through a private conversation between two artists who understood that true success comes not from repeating past triumphs, but from having the courage to keep evolving. Dean Martin's secret meeting with Elvis proved that sometimes the most important moments in entertainment history happen not on stages or in recording studios, but in quiet conversations between artists who inspire each other to be better than they ever thought possible.